At dusk in 16th-century Benin City, you are a palace runner, wondering whether the city's reported lamps will actually help you find one particular gate. Your instruction is 6 words long, which has somehow made it important enough to rehearse as 12. If evenings like this are honestly useful, you may like or subscribe, and share where you are listening and your local time. Let the room grow dim, settle into a comfortable position, and follow the last warm color along the red earth. You are already outside a guild quarter in the Edo Kingdom, in what is now southern Nigeria, holding a modest rat fitting under one arm. Cooking fires are being banked behind compound walls. The main street is still clear, the side lanes are darkening, and your left sandal has begun to consider a separate future in the mud. You retie the packet beside the entrance to the quarter, drawing the cord twice around the cloth and pressing the knot flat with your thumb. In Edo, an idamu is a quarter, a place where residents, family connection, office, and specialized work may gather into one part of the city. It is not merely a label on a map. The word belongs to doorways, compounds, inherited duties, neighbors who know one another's work, and people who can tell from a familiar sound which workshop is closing late. Behind the wall, someone lifts a pot from its stones. A child is called indoors. An adult shakes ash across a cooking fire so that the coals will last without throwing a tall flame. The quarter does not become silent at dusk. It changes its kind of noise. Tools are counted, doors are drawn, and short errands that seemed harmless in daylight acquire edges. You test the packet again. The fitting inside is small enough to carry with one arm, and important enough that you have been told not to unwrap it. The spoken instruction must go with it. You listen for the broader street, where sandals and low voices pass steadily, then step away from the threshold. The route begins not with a grand view of a capital, but with the ordinary fact that you need to remember which turning comes after the next one. You repeat the instruction exactly as you take the broader way toward the palace. 6 words, a name, an object, a place, and a time. By the 3rd repetition you have added an explanation nobody requested. By the 4th, the explanation has acquired a defense. A short message is proving remarkably ambitious. The broad route is easier to hold in the fading light than the lane that cuts away between compounds. Early European descriptions, compiled from travelers' reports, speak of long, straight streets and narrower ways crossing them. Such accounts need care. They were written through foreign expectations, and they do not turn every road into a measured line, yet their broad impression can sit beside Edo knowledge and the physical evidence of an ordered city. Important ways, intersecting routes, compounds set in relation to them, and movement directed toward the palace center. None of that relieves you of choosing correctly. You keep the packet tucked against your ribs and use the wall on your right as a guide. The road ahead has not vanished, but its margins are losing color. People approaching are shapes first and faces only when they draw near. You say the 6 words again, this time without the defense, and decide that the palace attendants will probably survive the absence of your commentary. Your left sandal sinks where runoff has softened the red earth at the road's edge. The foot goes down with little ceremony. The sandal remains behind with greater conviction. For one slow moment, the city has assigned you 2 destinations. You shift the packet under your arm, brace one hand against the wall, and pull upward without twisting the strap. The mud releases its claim with a quiet sound. It has chosen the less convenient sandal with professional care, leaving the other one clean enough to make the difference irritating. Rain and drainage belong to the city's daily movement. Museum interpretation and recent archaeology both point to managed channels, long-used surfaces, and building arrangements that had to meet heavy seasonal water. The evidence does not provide a diary of this particular puddle. It does make a softened shoulder, a firmer center, and attention to run off entirely at home in the route. You scrape the sole against a harder patch and look ahead. The main surface rises slightly toward its middle. Water has darkened the hollows and left the crown more dependable. That change is enough to guide your next steps. The packet is dry. The message remains 6 words, despite the mud's attempt to introduce a 7th. You move toward the firmer ground, carrying one small lesson about the road on the bottom of your foot. You free the last strip of wet earth from the sandal and follow the firmer crown of the street. Compound walls remain on your right, their surfaces taking the final light differently where they have been repaired, smoothed, or marked by weather. A doorway opens, then closes behind a pair of adults carrying shallow baskets. Their path crosses yours without confusion because each person reads the same relations: wall, opening, road center, side channel, next intersection. A planned city is not experienced as a plan held above the head. It arrives at human height. You know that the palace lies inward. You know the quarter behind you. You know which walls continue and which openings interrupt them. The ordered avenue matters because it converts a distant destination into a series of manageable choices. Archaeology can recover surfaces, walls, alignments, gates, fragments, and the long persistence of building axes. Edu histories preserve names, duties, places, and relationships that objects alone cannot speak. Neither source turns your route into certainty. Together they support a city whose spaces were made, maintained, remembered, and used. You adjust the packet so its knot faces upward. At the next doorway, lamplight has not yet appeared, but a person sweeping the threshold has cleared a pale fan across the ground. That small contrast tells you where the channel begins. You step around it and continue, storing the cleared threshold as a possible landmark for the return. You pass the open mouth of a side lane. Voices come from somewhere within it, close enough to hear but too deep in shadow to place. The lane itself narrows quickly between walls, and the last sky above it is only a pale strip. No lamp marks its entrance. Nothing requires one. The main street and the side way do not share the same visibility. A statement about reported street lamps in Benin City is not a promise that every route glowed equally or that light stood at regular intervals like a modern system drawn on a plan. Different parts of the city serve different movements. Court approaches, busy routes, household thresholds, and narrow residential lanes could meet darkness in different ways. You keep to the broader road because the errand has a palace gate at its far end, and because the packet is easier to protect where you can see approaching shoulders. A man leaving the lane pauses, recognizes the direction of your movement, and gives you room without either of you speaking. Behind him, someone laughs at a remark you cannot hear. The sound follows you for several steps, then folds back between the walls. You do not enter the lane. On the return, perhaps, it may shorten the distance. For now, the broad route offers more information. Moving figures, open sky, the line of the wall, and the next crossing. Darkness is not one condition spread over the city. It gathers by degrees, and you choose among those degrees as carefully as among streets. A shallow channel runs beside the next doorway. Water slides through it in a dark, narrow line, carrying a leaf that turns once against the edge before moving on. You step across rather than through. The channel is not wide, yet it changes how the entrance works. Feet stay drier, runoff leaves the wall, the doorway remains usable. The Pit Rivers Museum's interpretation of Benin City, developed with Edo specialists, describes a planned city by the 1500s with drainage as well as street lamps and great earthen works. Recent excavation adds material detail, long-lived building surfaces, drainage relationships, walls, gates, ceramics, plant remains, and signs of repeated rebuilding. You cross the channel, and the evidence returns at once to its proper scale beneath your feet. A city that manages water does not defeat rain. It gives rain a preferred direction, and then relies on people to keep that direction open. The leaf hesitating in the runnel has nearly found the one place most likely to make itself important. Someone at the doorway reaches down with a short twig and lifts it free before it can settle. You nod in thanks, though the action was not performed for you. The water quickens along the cleared line. Your sandal lands on the dry lip beyond it, and the packet remains steady. One maintained channel has done its work without asking to become a monument. The next quarter announces its work by sound before any doorway comes into view. A light tapping repeats behind a wall, pauses, and begins again in a slower rhythm. Farther along, wood is set down on wood. The day's labour is closing, but it has not ended everywhere at once. Some idumo were associated with hereditary occupations and court guilds. In Benin City, residence and specialised duty could share geography. Brass casters, carvers, weavers, leather workers, and other organised groups belong to a social and political landscape shaped by the Oba's court. That did not make every object free merchandise or every artisan an independent seller. Royal patronage brought privileges, obligations, rules of access, and work directed toward particular purposes. You do not need to identify the hidden tool from its sound. The quarter is useful to you as a marker. After the tapping wall comes a broader opening. After the opening, the Palacewood Road bends only slightly before the controlled approach. You had been told this at midday, when every direction seemed insulting in its simplicity. A final tap lands behind the wall. A door bar settles. Someone carries a bundle of fuel across the threshold and turns the other way. You repeat your instruction once, then let the quarter's fading work replace it in your mind. The route is becoming a chain of actions rather than a list of names. A porter approaches with a covered load balanced against one shoulder. You draw closer to the wall, keeping the packet under your forearm, and he shifts toward the road's center. The exchange takes only a few steps. His burden smells faintly of fiber and dry leaves. Yours smells of cloth and the oil from your own hand. Benin City connected many kinds of movement. People carried food from markets, materials toward workshops, messages between quarters, tribute and service toward court, water into compounds, refuse away from work areas, and personal news that had no official importance until it reached the person waiting for it. The palace shaped the capital without swallowing all of its life. The porter glances at your wrapped object, and then at your direction. Perhaps he understands the errand's general kind. Perhaps he merely notes that you are trying not to collide with him. The record cannot decide, and the route does not need it to. He passes, the load clears your shoulder, and both tasks continue. Ahead, another pair of adults cross from a sideway. One carries a basket at hip height, the other has empty hands and walks with the slight impatience of someone whose companion has stopped twice already. You time your pace to pass behind them. The street's order is not empty geometry. It is a practiced negotiation among people with separate destinations. At the next doorway, several adults gather around a visitor, hiding the wall mark you expected to use. You slow without stopping. The mark should be a repaired patch, smoother than the surface around it, followed by the second crossing. All you can see now are shoulders, a basket rim, and one arm moving through an explanation. The city remains ordered, but order does not remove people from the way. You count intersections instead, one narrow lane behind you, one shallow channel, this crowded threshold, then the wider crossing. Human memory works with alternatives when a landmark disappears. The visitor's business seems likely to outlive the remaining light. You hear one fact repeated, then corrected, then returned in a more impressive form. Your own 6-word instruction becomes modest by comparison. You keep it silent. Early descriptions of Benin often admire width, straightness, order, and the appearance of houses. That admiration records a genuine encounter, but it also tells us what surprised the observers. You do not walk through their surprise. You walk through a city whose residents know where to stand, whom to avoid delaying, and which count will replace an obscured wall mark. The group shifts at last. The smooth patch appears exactly where expected, though by then you no longer need it. The wider crossing is opening ahead, and the Palacewood direction has become easier to hold. The wider crossing opens around you, and for a few moments the nearest walls stand farther away. More sky remains above the road here. The Palacewood direction feels less like a guess, because the long way continues through the junction. while two narrower streets leave it at angles. A 17th-century description published by Olfet Dapper speaks of remarkably broad, straight streets in Benin, with smaller ways crossing them. Dapper did not walk these roads himself. He compiled information from travelers, and his words must be read as reported observation shaped by distance, translation, and European comparison. Even so, the account can be set carefully beside archaeology and Edo knowledge. The useful point is not a boast about perfect geometry. It is that major routes and intersections were strong enough features to impress visitors and to organize local movement. You cross behind a woman carrying a shallow tray and before two men guiding a burden between them. The wider space allows all of you to adjust without stopping. At its far side, the wall line narrows your view again. You look back once. The quarter you left is no longer visible, yet the crossing itself has become a landmark for the return. The city is giving you a sequence: dark lane, working quarter, crowded doorway, open junction. You turn palaceward, and let the next section replace the last beneath your feet. House fronts line the way, but they do not reveal the full lives behind them. A doorway may show a short gallery, the edge of a courtyard, or another wall set deeper within the compound. Then your angle changes and the interior disappears. Early accounts describe houses arranged along streets, with galleries and many rooms. Archaeology of the palace area likewise shows that walls, courtyards, passages, and rebuilt structures formed complicated landscapes rather than single open halls. The same caution belongs at ordinary compounds. A street facade is not the whole dwelling, and a surviving foundation is not the whole household. You pass an entrance where an adult spreads a mat to shake dust from it before night. Another person carries a vessel through a deeper doorway. The visible actions last only seconds, yet they remind you that the wall beside the road is an edge shared by two kinds of space. Outside, traffic keeps moving. Inside, food, storage, work, washing, conversation and rest follow their own arrangement. The packet rubs against your forearm, so you change its position. You have begun to recognize the route by the rhythm of openings. Narrow door, long wall, paired doors, recessed entrance. No formal map is needed in your hands. The pattern itself keeps you oriented. A faint gleam appears far ahead, then vanishes behind passing bodies. It may be firelight near the palace approach. It may be a household flame. You do not decide yet. The next wall still requires your attention. Water can be heard before it can be seen. A thin current moves beside the road where the channel deepens, touching its earthen edge with a soft, regular sound. You shift toward the drier center and place each step where the surface has remained firm. Recent excavation in Benin City has identified long sequences of occupation, with major activity from the 14th century onward and substantial 16th and 17th century levels. Archaeologists have found successive structures that sometimes keep similar axes, along with surfaces, walls, ceramics, plant remains, and evidence of craft. Such finds do not reconstruct this exact evening. They show an urban landscape repeatedly built, used, altered, and maintained. You pass the evidence in one sentence and return to the moving water. It has cut a small shine through the darker earth. At one point, a shallow deposit has begun to narrow the line. The current divides around it and joins again beyond. The city's order is not a finished design protected from change. Every season tests it. Every footfall wears it. Every repair adjusts what came before. The road you use may preserve a direction longer than any single surface upon it. Your sandal has dried enough to stop slipping. You take 3 steady steps, then another, while the channel continues beside you. At the next doorway it disappears beneath a crossing and emerges on the far side, carrying the water onward without requiring you to follow. The cord around the packet loosens. You feel the cloth shift against your ribs and stop before the knot can turn into an object lesson. The nearest useful light comes from a doorway where someone is tending a small flame. You ask permission with a glance, Step near the threshold and hold the packet where the glow reaches it. The light is local and practical. It reveals the cord, your fingers, the nearest part of the wall, and almost nothing beyond your shoulder. A household flame can guide one knot without illuminating a city. A catalogue on digital Benin preserves an Edo term associated with oil lamps used to illuminate a house after dusk. A surviving brass oil lamp linked to the royal palace is also catalogued, though it dates much later than the 16th century route you were walking. These are important strands of evidence for lamp traditions. They do not prove that this doorway held this precise object, or that every street received the same provision. You draw the cord tight and tuck the loose end beneath the crossing turn. The person by the doorway watches your first attempt fail, then politely watches the second one succeed. The packet has required a public performance from a knot that was meant to be simple. You thank the keeper of the flame and step back. Within 2 paces, the cord is harder to see, but now it holds. The doorway remains behind as a small amber patch, useful to one household, one passerby, and one repaired mistake. The wall beyond the doorway has a smooth face that catches the last light of the sky. Its upper section is already grey, while the lower surface retains a warmer tone. You run no hand across it. The change is enough to help you keep your distance from the softened edge of the road. Historical descriptions speak of carefully finished earthen architecture, and research into the old palace landscape records walls, courtyards, gates, and repeated construction. Smoothness does not mean untouched permanence. Earthen surfaces demand renewal. Rain marks them, people repair them, and later building can follow the direction of what stood before. You walk beside the wall rather than studying it as an exhibit. A shallow groove near its base shows where water has passed. Someone has placed a flat fragment over the wettest point at a doorway, making a small bridge for feet. You use it and feel the piece settle slightly under your weight. The palace approaches nearer now. Voices ahead have a more formal rhythm, with short exchanges followed by pauses. The wrapped fitting no longer feels like an abstract responsibility. It belongs to a threshold within those voices. You repeat the instruction once, quietly. The 6 words remain intact. No defense follows them. The smooth wall carries a faint reflection from somewhere ahead, and you continue toward it, careful not to mistake reflected light for the lamp itself. Movement narrows between 2 walls as you approach a controlled passage. The broad street has brought you near the palace precinct, but entry is not simply a matter of continuing in the same line. An attendant stands where the route tightens. Another adult waits beyond him, partly hidden by the wall. Recent archaeology has uncovered a substantial earthen wall and a timber gate in the historic palace area. Earlier records and reconstructed maps also show a landscape of compounds, roads, courtyards, specialized groups, and controlled entrances. A gate is therefore more than a gap in a barrier. It is architecture joined to people who recognize, question, direct, admit, or refuse. You slow before being told. The packet stays visible against your forearm. The attendant looks first at your face, then at the wrapped object, then toward the person behind you. That sequence is enough to organize the queue. The walls remove much of the side view. Their effect is practical. People pass one at a time or in small groups. A person standing here can see what approaches. A visitor cannot pretend to have wandered accidentally into an inner compound. You stop on firmer ground beside the entrance. The gate's shadow is deeper than the road behind you, but a low glow farther in defines one edge of the passage. Your errand has reached the point where memory must become speech. You wait for the attendant to finish with the person ahead. 2 adults stand before you. The first carries no visible object and explains his business at a length, suggesting that the object may have been brevity. The second holds a folded bundle and listens with the patient stillness of someone who arrived prepared for exactly this delay. You keep the 6 words in order. The message has been repeated so often that each word now seems capable of leaving on its own. You anchor them to the packet. Name at the knot, object at the fold, place under your thumb, time against your wrist. Court access followed rank, office, obligation, and recognition. The old palace was not one undivided building, but a large political and ceremonial landscape. Different compounds and societies had different users and duties. The modern record cannot supply the exact procedure at this gate on this evening, so the scene remains modest. Adults wait, attendants manage passage, and your small errand must fit an existing order. The first speaker finally finishes. The attendant asks one short question. The entire explanation begins again from a different end. You lower your eyes to the packet so your face does not become part of the discussion. The folded bundle ahead shifts from one arm to the other. Darkness gathers along the wall while the controlled passage remains active. Your business is no greater than theirs. It is merely shorter, and you are beginning to regard that as a specialized skill. While the queue advances, you watch the gate do its work. It slows movement enough for recognition. It separates the broad public route from spaces with narrower permissions. It gives arrivals a place to state their purpose and attendants a place to redirect them. Surveys of surviving Benin earthworks and gates show that entrances could be complex passages through banks and ditches, not simple breaks in a line. Within the palace landscape, excavated walls and a timber gate likewise point to controlled transitions. Edo knowledge gives those transitions social meaning that soil alone cannot recover. Gates belong to authority, neighborhood, movement, and memory. The attendant turns aside a man who is approached from the wrong angle, not harshly, but with a gesture toward another entrance. The man accepts the direction and leaves at once. The gate has changed his route without any wall moving. Your turn draws nearer. You shift the packet to both hands. The glow within the passage catches the cloth's upper fold, then disappears as someone crosses it. Light and permission are working together here, but not as the same thing. A flame can reveal a face. An attendant decides whether the face continues. The person with the folded bundle speaks, receives an answer, and steps through. You move into the place she has left. The gate is now behind your shoulders as well as ahead of your feet. You state your purpose, show the wrapped fitting, and deliver the first half of the instruction before the attendant lifts one hand. For a breath, you fear that the message has expanded despite every effort. Then he points toward a second threshold and tells you whom to ask for there. The palace precinct contains differentiated spaces. Historical reconstruction based on old excavations, Edo informants, maps, and later archaeology suggests compounds within compounds, roads, courts, workshops, and societies attached to particular duties. The palace should not be imagined as a single room enlarged until it becomes a city. You repeat only the necessary name. The attendant nods. He has no need for the 3 explanations prepared on the road, nor for the defense that briefly followed them. You enter the permitted passage. The wall on one side holds a faint reflected glow. On the other, darkness settles under an overhang. An adult carrying a covered vessel comes toward you and is admitted outward without stopping. Her familiarity with the route is visible in the way she turns before the direction is given. The second threshold lies ahead, marked by people rather than ornament. One person stands, another sits, and a third crosses behind them. You keep to the side indicated at the gate. Your errand has moved from the city's broad avenue into a smaller chain of recognized places, each one narrowing the distance between the packet and the person meant to receive it. The palace approach is wider than the lane behind you, yet its edges are already dark. Open space does not create light by itself. Walls interrupt the remaining sky. Roofed margins gather shadow. Passing bodies briefly hide the glow ahead. That distinction matters because a planned city is often flattened in retelling. Broad streets become uniformly bright streets. Reported lamps become a complete municipal grid. One striking object becomes a standard type repeated everywhere. The evidence for Benin does not support that smooth transformation. You walk through uneven visibility. The center of the approach offers enough contrast to see the next few steps. Near the wall, you would need touch and memory. A person crossing with a small flame lights his own hands and the rim of what he carries, then leaves the space darker after he passes. The wrapped fitting presses against your palm. You choose the central line until an attendant gestures you aside for a group coming outward. Their movement is formal but not dramatic. They pass, the route opens, and you return to it. Ahead, the steady flame that appeared and vanished from the main street now holds its place. It is not high enough, from this angle, to become a beacon over roofs. It is simply where people continue to gather near the court. That bounded usefulness is already more interesting than the claim that darkness had been conquered. Ahead, a steady flame marks a place where adults are still moving near the court. It is brighter than the household doorway you borrowed for the knot, though its useful circle remains small. Feet, lower walls, and the nearest faces appear clearly. Beyond them, distance returns to shadow. The Pit Rivers Museum's account of the Kingdom of Benin, co-curated with Edo historians and practitioners, says that by the 1500s Benin City was a planned capital with street lamps, drainage, and great earthen works. That is the strongest clear institutional wording for the title's core. It supports reported street lighting in the city. It does not specify that every road was lit, that every lamp shared one height, or that a complete lighting plan has survived. You step toward the flame because it changes what you can do. An attendant's staff becomes visible against the wall. A threshold line appears where two dark surfaces had seemed continuous. The people waiting can distinguish an arrival from someone merely crossing the approach. The lamp has not turned night into day. It has made one junction legible. You keep the packet in front of you and move until the next attendant can see both your hands. The ordinary relief arrives before any larger interpretation. You have found the right cluster of people. The flame has served your errand by giving the next human landmark a face. Closer to the light, the source becomes bounded. Flame, vessel, support, and nearby surface belong to one working arrangement. The brightness falls quickly, a face turns clear, a shoulder softens, and the road beyond returns to uncertainty. Modern retellings often prefer a city washed evenly in light. The evidence asks for a smaller picture. A museum interpretation supports street lamps by the 16th century. Edo lamp traditions and catalogued objects support the use of oil lamps after dusk. Early descriptions help establish the scale and order of the capital. None of these materials amounts to a modern illumination survey with measured spacing, height, fuel, and coverage. You do not need such a survey to complete the errand. The light lets you read the attendant's gesture. He points not through the nearest doorway, but along the wall to a second opening. Without the flame, you might have waited in the wrong place and given your 6 words to a person whose duty was listening politely to errors. You shift left. The packet's cloth catches a narrow stripe of brightness. For the first time since leaving the quarter, you can inspect the knot without borrowing a household threshold. It remains tight. The lamp's value is neither global nor symbolic in your hands. It is immediate. One visible gesture has saved one unnecessary explanation, and the message continues toward its intended listener. The flame carries the smell of burning oil, though the exact fuel of this carefully composite 16th century lamp cannot be proved from the surviving strands alone. Palm oil was an important local product, and oil lamps are well attested in Edo material and language. The sensible narration stops there. It does not assign a recipe to every flame in every century. You pass through the lit patch. Insects turn near the brightness, appearing and disappearing so quickly that the air seems to stitch itself. The nearest wall holds a warm reflection. The ground shows footprints, a shallow worn place, and the edge of a threshold. 3 steps farther on, those details fade. Light after dark is reported here as an aid to movement around an important route or court approach. Whose movement it served, under whose authority, and how access shaped its use are better questions than whether the city can be entered into a contest for technological priority. The palace organized labor, privilege, duty, and space. The lamp near its approaches would belong to those relationships, not float above them as an independent invention. The attendant calls a name. It is not yours, but it belongs to the next person you must find. You answer before the call is repeated. The flame has carried recognition across a few useful yards, and the errand moves again. A surviving brass lamp associated with the royal palace offers another strand of the story, but it comes from the 19th century, much later than your route. The British Museum catalogues it as an Edo object from Benin City, made in brass by lost wax casting and hammering. Its survival confirms a material tradition of court lighting. It cannot be placed beside your feet 3 centuries earlier, merely because it is beautiful and convenient. You let that later object remain later. The person ahead of you is holding a simpler source of light near a wall. Its vessel is partly hidden by the support and by his hand. You do not name its form beyond what the scene requires. Historical imagination works best when it accepts distance. The reported lamp gives you brightness. Edo lamp vocabulary gives you domestic use after dusk. The later palace object gives you continuity without identical design. The gaps remain gaps. You step around a person kneeling to adjust something near the base. No ritual is invented for the action. He may be tending the flame, moving a support, or retrieving an object. Your attention belongs to the doorway beyond him. The second threshold is now plain. A strip of light lies across its lower edge, and an attendant waits inside. You cross the strip, leaving the later brass lamp in its catalogue, and carrying only the evidence that belongs to this evening. The popular version of Benin's night lighting often grows taller in every retelling. Identical metal poles rise to a dramatic height. Palm oil flames line all the main streets. The whole city appears as a complete system, whose dimensions are repeated, without a clear trail back to a contemporary record. That picture is attractive because it is easy to see. It is also more specific than the opened evidence permits. Dapper's famous description concerns streets, houses, order, and scale, but he was a compiler rather than an eyewitness walking every avenue. The museum statement supports street lamps by the 1500s without supplying uniform height or city-wide coverage. The surviving palace lamp is later. A responsible answer keeps these pieces separate. You do not see a forest of identical poles. You see one working flame near a court approach, another household light remembered behind you, and darkness continuing between useful patches. That is enough for the human story. The attendant at the threshold asks the name attached to the instruction. You give it correctly. He turns his head towards someone within, and the movement is caught by the lamp. The later giant lamp tail can remain a tail with a thin chain. Your route needs no exaggeration. The next known person is visible, the next opening is found, and the object under your arm has almost reached its destination. The title's answer is now as practical as your sandals. Benin City was reported and interpreted as having street lamps by the 16th century, and lamp traditions are supported by Edo language and surviving material culture. The light in this story is therefore placed near an important route and palace approach, where it helps people recognize a threshold and one another. The evidence does not prove that every street shone, or that uniform 20-foot poles covered the capital. You move toward the attendant who has answered the call. His face is clear, while the wall behind him is not. He holds out both hands for the packet, but first asks for the spoken instruction. Your relief is not the pride of living in a city declared first at something. It is the smaller relief of knowing that this is the correct person. The flame has served movement governed by the palace, and your errand belongs to that movement. Other residents in other lanes may have relied on household fires, memory, companions, moonlight, or no light at all. You place the wrapped fitting across his palms but keep one end until the words are spoken. The knot, the cloth, the correct threshold, and the listening person all occupy the same circle of brightness. The lamp has done exactly enough. You say the 6 words, they leave your mouth in the right order and stop there. The 3 explanations prepared on the road do not escape. Neither does the defense. The attendant receives the message with the packet and makes no sign that history has been deprived of valuable commentary. He weighs the wrapped fitting in his hands, presses the knot, and asks whether the sender named any other condition. You answer no. It is the cleanest word you have spoken all evening. The palace landscape around you remains busy at a low level. Someone passes behind the threshold, a vessel is set down, an attendant nearer the gate repeats a direction. These are not spectacle. They are the ordinary mechanics of a large court, whose compounds, societies, workshops, and offices depend upon people carrying things and words to the right places. Your forearm feels strangely light without the packet. You rub the mark left by the cloth, and wait while the recipient calls the 6 words back to you. He does not use all 6. He gives the name, the object, and the place, which are enough to show that the instruction has taken root elsewhere. You nod. The errand is complete. The message is no longer a fragile sequence held between your teeth. It now belongs to the people inside the threshold. The attendant repeats the necessary words once more, then turns toward the inner passage. The burden of perfect memory leaves your shoulders so quietly that you notice it only when you try to rehearse again and find no reason. A spoken instruction moves by trust, repetition, office, and recognition. No surviving source records your composite exchange. The scene is built from the known organization of palace space and from an ordinary human method that requires no heroic invention. A messenger holds words until another responsible person can hold them instead. You step back from the threshold. The light that helped you arrive now falls across your empty hands. Without the packet, your stance changes. One arm swings freely, the other no longer presses inward to protect a knot. The recipient disappears beyond the doorway. You do not follow. Controlled space has received what it was meant to receive, and your authority ends at the point of delivery. Near the lamp, an attendant shifts his weight and looks toward the next arrival. The same pool of light will now serve someone else's recognition. Its purpose is not exhausted by your story, though your need for it is finished. You turn toward the outer gate. The route home is darker in prospect but simpler in mind. Nothing must be delivered. Nothing must be remembered exactly. You need only find the quarter whose evening sounds have already begun to soften. On the way back through the controlled passage, the claim about light settles into its proper size. Benin City had reported street lamps in a planned urban setting by the 1500s, according to the Pitt Rivers Museum's co-curated interpretation. Other evidence supports Edo oil lamp traditions and later court lamps. The popular uniform system of towering poles is not established by the sources opened for this episode. That careful answer does not diminish the city. It restores the people who made illumination useful. Someone obtained fuel. Someone made or maintained a vessel. Someone placed light where movement mattered. Attendants used it while managing access. Messengers, officials, craftspeople, carriers, and visitors crossed its reach for different reasons. You pass the first gate attendant, who recognizes you before you state anything. He gestures outward. The broad avenue lies beyond him, darker now than when you arrived. A boast about being first in the world would pull the story away from this gate and into a modern contest. Your return keeps it here. The question is not whether Benin defeats every other city in a ranking. It is how a known patch of brightness changed one person's next step. You cross the threshold. The palace glow remains behind your left shoulder. Ahead, the road can be read again by walls, openings, voices, and the memory of the route. You choose the quieter return route, keeping the palace glow behind your left shoulder. The choice does not mean entering the narrowest lane at once. You follow the broad way until the open crossing, then turn where a familiar wall carries a smoother patch near its base. Without the packet, the route feels shorter. This is partly because your arms are free, and partly because no word can now be lost. You still watch the ground. A completed errand does not make Red Earth less interested in sandals. The city's layout returns in reverse. A gate releases rather than admits. The wider approach becomes a distant glow, The long street leads away from court instead of toward it. Each landmark changes function while remaining in place. Dapper's compiled account can describe breadth. Archaeology can reveal alignment. Ido maps and histories can preserve names and relationships. Your movement joins those kinds of evidence only in imaginative staging, never as an additional source. The runner is composite, but the need to navigate an organized capital at dusk is grounded in the city those sources support. At the open crossing, two adults separate, one taking the broad route and the other entering a sideway. You take the sideway now. It is darker, yet it points directly toward the sounds of the quarter. The palace flame disappears behind the wall, and memory assumes the work. The side lane asks you to slow down. Its ground is narrower, the walls closer, and the open strip of sky thinner than on the avenue. You place each foot before shifting your weight. Familiar compound sounds replace the formal voices of the gate. Someone is grinding the last portion of food for the evening. A door-bar knocks into place. Water is poured with a brief rush. Then a vessel touches earth. You cannot see the actions, but you know their scale. They belong to households settling their own work, rather than to attendants arranging passage. The lane demonstrates why the title cannot mean universal brightness. No street lamp stands here in this scene. A faint household glow reaches one threshold and stops. Farther on, you use the pale difference between wall and sky. You have traded visibility for familiarity. The route is known by a slight inward turn, a place where the ground rises, and the smell of a cooking fire banked with leaves. None of these would help a stranger equally. They help you because the quarter is no longer an abstract destination. At a doorway, an adult steps aside before you ask. Your empty hands explain that you are returning, not delivering. You thank him and continue. The lane remains dark, but it is not empty or lost. It is occupied, remembered, and connected to the broader city you have just crossed. A cooking fire behind a wall briefly outlines the edge of a drain. The flame itself is hidden. Its reflection trembles on the damp surface, revealing a narrow cut where water leaves the threshold. You step over it and recognize the outer edge of your own quarter. The landmark combines two ordinary systems. Household fire provides a local glow. Maintained drainage gives runoff a path. Neither works at the scale of a superlative. Together they keep one doorway legible and one pair of sandals out of a channel. Your route has returned to the sounds heard before departure. The tapping workshop is silent now. The wall that held the last tool strokes has become a long dark surface. Beyond it, someone checks a latch twice. The second check is quieter, perhaps because the first one was perfectly adequate and merely failed to feel persuasive. You count one more entrance. The familiar threshold should follow a short wall and a place where rain has worn the road edge. Both appear in the fire's faint spill. The palace light cannot be seen from here. It does not need to follow you home to have been useful. Its part of the errand ended at the controlled approach. This smaller glow takes over without ceremony. You avoid the drain, find the firm center, and move toward the doorway whose proportions you know, even when most of it is shadow. Your troublesome sandal remains attached. The packet is gone. The message is no longer yours to protect. These three facts make the final stretch easier than any map. You pass the place where the mud caught you, now visible only as a darker softness beside the road. There is no reason to test it again. The city has already conducted that experiment at your expense. Behind the quarter walls, cooking fires are low. A few voices continue, but their sentences no longer travel far. The working day has narrowed into washing, storing, checking, and the last small exchanges before doors close. The messenger's danger was never an invented threat. It was losing a route, muddying a packet, giving words to the wrong person, or arriving at a gate whose attendants could not place the errand. The outcome is equally modest. You kept the object dry enough, the instruction intact enough, and the sandal mostly present. The familiar wall begins on your right. Your fingers brush no surface, yet you know its length by the number of steps to the doorway. A shallow pool of light lies ahead, cast from within the compound. You do not hurry. The errand has ended, and the last task is simply to cross the correct threshold. The route that seemed uncertain at dusk has become a chain of completed choices behind you. At the edge of a small pool of light, your familiar threshold appears. The glow reaches the lower wall, the packed earth before the entrance, and the hand of an adult drawing the door inward. It does not reach the end of the lane. It does not need to. You step across before the doorway closes. Inside, someone asks whether the fitting was received. You answer yes. Someone else asks whether the instruction was repeated correctly. You answer yes again, with slightly more dignity than the journey deserves. This is where the title's promise ends. Benin City was described and interpreted as having street lamps within its planned urban landscape by the 16th century. Surviving objects and Edo lamp traditions support illumination after dusk, including court associations. The exact scale, regularity, height and coverage remain uncertain, and the familiar internet picture of uniform giant poles is not established by the source chain traced here. The human answer is smaller. A useful light near the palace helped you find an attendant and a threshold. A household glow helped you find the way home. Illumination served movement within a city organized by people, duties, gates, quarters, and memory. You set the muddy sandal near the wall and enter the compound. The known light remains by the doorway while the lane beyond grows quiet. No claim of being first in the world follows you inside. Before the sky fully darkens, you press your heel beside a rain-cut edge near a managed gate and watch loose soil slide toward the channel. The Edo term iya refers here to a system made from ditch and bank, worked earth rather than a single masonry wall. The soil removed from a cut could help raise the bank beside it, creating linked features that marked, channeled, enclosed and protected spaces. At human height, the system begins with damp earth against your heel. A narrow stream has bitten into the gate approach. Leaves have gathered where the outlet turns. Every carrier using the passage steps around the same soft corner, widening it a little more. The earthworks of Benin form nested and cellular enclosures across the city and surrounding communities. Published totals vary, and comparisons to famous walls elsewhere often conceal more than they explain. You do not need a dramatic mileage figure to understand the task. One ditch, one bank, one gate, and one rain-cut edge are enough. You crouch and press 2 fingers into the slope. The upper layer crumbles, firmer earth lies beneath. Before night, the loose material must be cleared, the water given a line, and the walking edge restored. The Iya remains large in history because people repeatedly met it at this ordinary scale. You carry a short hoe, a woven basket, and a wooden beater. The equipment is sufficient for one blocked outlet and wholly inadequate for impressing anyone at a distance. That is probably an advantage. The goal is simple. Clear the channel before the next rain, move loosened earth to the worn bank face, and keep enough of the passage open for people who still need the gate. The work belongs to maintenance rather than first construction. Whatever ceremonies, commands, and collective labor shaped the great earthworks, survival also depended upon smaller acts performed after water, roots, feet, and time had altered them. A leaf has lodged across the outlet at precisely the angle most likely to collect its relatives. You hook it with the hoe. 2 more leaves emerge from beneath it, followed by a clot of silt that has been waiting for formal recognition. The gate attendant watches without offering advice. He has his own duty, which includes seeing who approaches and ensuring that your basket does not become a new barrier. You set the tools on the higher side of the bank and begin at the downstream end. Clearing from the outlet inward gives the water somewhere to go. The first scrape reveals a shallow groove beneath the debris. It is not grand, but it is continuous. You follow that line back toward the damaged edge. You scrape wet leaves from the channel and expose the darker soil beneath. A thin quantity of trapped water moves at once, then stops where a second deposit has formed. The channel is less a fixed object than an instruction repeatedly given to run off. This way, not across the passage. Earthwork preservation depends upon that instruction remaining legible. Water will choose the lowest route available, whether builders intended it or not. A blocked outlet can turn a drain into a pool, soften a bank, and direct feet onto the same vulnerable edge. Maintenance links hydrology to movement. You lift the gathered leaves into the basket. Some are fresh and light. Others have become a dark mat with the consistency of a decision made several rains ago. The short hoe slides beneath them, and the channel deepens by the width of your hand. A carrier approaches the gate. You stop scraping and move the basket onto the bank. He steps through the clear half of the passage, glances at the exposed groove, and continues. The work has already changed his route by a few inches. You return the hoe to the outlet. Water released from the upper bend reaches the cleaned section and carries a thread of silt away. Its movement shows where the next obstruction lies. You do not need to survey the whole area. The current points to the next stroke. The ditch lies beside the bank because digging and building can belong to the same action. Earth removed from the lower cut is not waste. Lifted, placed, packed and extended, it contributes to the rise alongside it. The paired form is one reason the word wall can mislead when used alone. You stand in the ditch's shallow working edge and look upward. From here, the bank appears steeper than it did from the passage. Its surface bears roots, repaired scars, and places where runoff has written thin vertical lines. The gate interrupts the earthwork, but it does not erase the relationship. Passage, bank, ditch, and approach work together. Archaeological and landscape studies describe Benin's ear as an extensive cellular system enclosing communities and defining spaces. Different segments had different histories, dimensions, conditions, and uses. No single cross-section can represent them all. This one is enough to show the basic economy of Earth. What is cut below can become height above. You drive the hoe gently into the silt, loosen a compacted strip, and lift it into the basket. The material is heavier than its appearance promised. When the basket is half full, you climb the short slope and set it beside the worn bank face. The repair does not import a monument. It moves the nearby ground a few steps and asks it to hold a better line. You carry damp earth only a few paces from the channel to the bank. The basket pulls at both hands, so you keep your elbows close and place each foot on the firmer ridges left by earlier traffic. At the worn face, you tip the load into the shallow cut made by water and sandals. Construction histories across the earthworks were not uniform, and this composite repair is not presented as a recorded technique from one named gate. It is a plausible low-stakes action grounded in the material itself. Loose soil must be removed from one place. A damaged edge needs fill in another. The distance between them is small. You break the larger clods with the back of the hoe. Damp earth settles into the hollow. A second adult attached to the gate brings a little drier material from the upper bank and mixes it through, improving the texture without a speech about engineering. Together you press the first layer. The wooden beater remains on the tool mat for now. Packing too much at once would leave a soft center beneath a convincing surface, and the next rain is unlikely to respect appearances. You step back. The repaired patch is still darker than the bank around it, but its line no longer falls directly toward the passage. One basket has not restored an entire system. It has given the next basket somewhere sound to join. People continue to knead the gate while you work. Two traders approach from the city side, one carrying a covered basket and the other a bundle tied across his back. From the outer side, a woman with an empty vessel is already entering. The damaged corner lies exactly where all three would prefer to place a foot. You move the tools against the bank and stand in the soft section, making your own body the least ambiguous sign. The attendant directs the outward pair to wait. The woman passes on the firmer edge, thanking nobody because the gate has merely continued to function. Gates within the Benin earthwork system were social as well as structural places. They channeled movement through banks and ditches, but people managed the passage. Recent fieldwork at surviving earthworks has documented complex gate forms, including an approach rising between ramparts. Historical sources also show that observers sometimes forced these features into European categories, such as wall, palisade, or fortification. The ground and the community require a wider reading. The traders cross after the woman. One avoids the wet patch. The other sees his companion avoid it, and steps into the same safe place without looking down. You leave a narrow path open as you return to the repair. A gate that cannot pass people has failed its ordinary purpose, however impressive its earth. The work must improve the edge without pretending the entrance is yours alone. You pause for 2 more carriers, then pack soil where feet and water have cut the same corner. The wear is cumulative. 1 sandal does little. A season of sandals follows the easiest line, especially when runoff has already softened it. Water responds to the hollow, making the easiest line easier still. You shape the patch so the walking surface tilts gently away from the vulnerable face. The exact original profile is unknowable here, and you do not invent one. Your aim is immediate. Stop water from collecting in the foot-worn depression, and guide it toward the cleared outlet. The second worker holds the basket while you press soil under the lip of the bank. A carrier waiting at the gate watches the procedure with the frank interest of someone who will test the result within moments. When the way opens, he places 1 foot on the repaired corner. The surface yields slightly but does not shear. His second foot lands beyond it. He continues without comment. Maintenance rarely receives a review, which is useful because the channel has already collected enough opinions. You add a thin layer of drier earth and smooth it with the hose flat side. The corner now reads as part of the passage, rather than an invitation to step lower. Water and traffic will return. The repair is not permanent. Its success lies in changing what the next rain and the next foot are most likely to do. The inner city area is 1 circuit within a much wider pattern. Beyond it, interlocking earthworks enclosed communities and parcels of lived space. They did not form 1 solitary ring around an empty center, and they were not a continuous masonry barrier like the Great Wall of China. From your position at the gate, that larger pattern is impossible to see. This is precisely why superlatives can become unhelpful. A huge total compresses countless local segments into 1 number. The number may vary with mapping method, definition, preservation, and which connected features are included. The human system appears instead as repeated decisions about boundary and passage. You look along the bank until vegetation and the curve of the ground conceal it. Behind you, the ditch continues past the outlet you are clearing. Ahead, the gate joins routes on both sides. Somewhere beyond sight, other enclosures meet other paths and communities. The archaeology of Benin's earthworks supports a cellular landscape developed over long periods. Edu histories and living knowledge preserve meanings that measurements alone cannot provide. The surviving traces remain part of a modern city and its surroundings, not the footprint of a place vanished without descendants. You lift the hoe again. The enormous network returns to 1 compacted strip under the blade. Understanding begins with the local relation. Earth removed, bank raised, route interrupted, gate made, passage maintained. You can read the system at human scale by standing where 4 things meet. The ditch lowers the ground, the bank raises it, the gate permits crossing, the approach directs feet toward that permission. None of the 4 works independently. A child arriving with an adult points at the basket of wet leaves. The adult steers him around the tools and through the passage. Their path rises slightly, levels at the gate, then descends beyond your view. The movement reveals the shape more clearly than a distant description. Recent survey of a surviving Benin gate has recorded an ascending passage between ramparts and other structural details. Such evidence helps correct the habit of imagining every opening as a simple hole through a uniform ridge. Gates could have depth, slope, turns and relationships to adjacent earthworks. Their forms also changed and suffered damage. You do not transfer one surveyed gate wholesale onto this composite scene. You borrow only the supported principle that passage geometry mattered. Here, the worn corner lies where rising feet meet runoff from the bank. That conjunction explains the repair better than any military metaphor. You scrape the last soft material from the walking line and add it to the basket. The child's footprints remain shallow on the firmer section. 4 linked features have guided 2 people through without requiring them to know the scale of the network beneath the evening sky. The channel bends where roots hold one edge and loosen another. A thick root crosses high enough to brace the bank, while a cluster of fine growth fills the lowest part of the outlet. Pulling everything would make the opening look clean and leave the soil less secure. You test the fine stems with your fingers. They come free with the trapped leaves. The larger root remains firm. The easy repair would be to cut indiscriminately. The sound repair is to remove what blocks water without taking away what binds earth. Surviving ear face pressures from erosion, vegetation, construction, roads, and urban expansion. Some stretches remain substantial. Others have been cut, leveled, built over, or reduced to traces. Community knowledge and participation matter because preservation happens among living neighborhoods, not around an abandoned ruin sealed from use. The route before you belongs to the smaller problem. You loosen silt from beneath it and make a narrow passage that leaves the upper support undisturbed. Water begins to seep through. The second worker gathers the removed growth. He separates useful lengths from the sodden mat and sets the rest with the leaves. Neither of you treats every plant as an enemy of the bank. At the bend, the channel now has a clear low line and a held upper edge. The repair looks less thorough than stripping the surface bare. It is better because the ground, rather than neatness, determined the choice. You remove only the loose growth that obstructs the channel. The stronger roots remain. Their presence complicates the line, but complexity is not the same as disorder. A maintained earthwork is a relationship among soil, water, vegetation, use, and repeated judgment. The hoe's narrow edge opens a path beneath the root cluster. You work from downstream, drawing silt toward the basket rather than pushing it into the next bend. The second adult follows with his hand, checking that no compacted ridge remains. This close attention is not meant to romanticize endless labor. Earthworks on such a scale required organized authority and collective effort. Boundaries could protect, control, separate, identify, and express political relationships. The ordinary maintenance scene sits within that larger history, without making one worker responsible for the entire landscape. A beetle displaced from the damp leaves crosses the bank and disappears under the tool mat. You lift the mat, retrieve the wooden beater, and set it farther from the edge. The beetle has chosen a route through the worksite with no respect for gate management. The outlet now shows a continuous shallow fall. You pour a small amount of trapped water from a vessel into its upper end. It reaches the root, narrows, then passes beneath without pooling. The stronger root holds, the channel carries. You leave both functions in place. The gate approach rises between the earthworks, and evening makes the slope easier to feel than to see. You walk it from the lower side with the empty basket, noting where your heel slips and where the packed surface remains steady. At the top, the citywood path opens. Below, the ditch draws away beside the bank. Recent archaeological survey at a surviving Benin earthwork has documented an ascending gate passage with substantial structural detail. That finding anchors the idea that a gate could be a shaped route through a deep earthen system. It does not tell us that every entrance was identical, nor does it provide the maintenance record for this composite gate. You return immediately to the slope. The worn edge sits on the inside of the turn, where people shorten the path. A narrow groove directs rain toward the same place. The repair will hold better if the walking line remains obvious, and the water line becomes less inviting. The attendant places a small marker beside the wet corner. not to close the route but to draw feet outward by half a step. The next person follows the visible center without instruction. You stand at the lower end and look up once more. The gate is neither a flat doorway nor an isolated opening. It is a short journey through shaped ground. Your task is to keep that journey readable before darkness and rain make every choice harder. You test the packed edge with the wooden beater. The first strike gives a soft sound and leaves a shallow mark. You add a thin layer of drier soil, spread it with the hoe, and strike again. The sound is duller, the surface moves less. No source records this exact beater or technique at a named Benin gate, so the action remains plausible staging rather than a historical claim. What survives materially is the earthwork, its forms, erosion, passages, and evidence of construction and long use. The narration should not turn practical imagination into an excavated fact. You keep the strikes moderate. The aim is not to harden the bank like fired brick. It is to close loose spaces, shape the edge, and leave a surface that can shed water. The second worker presses the margins by foot while you work the center. A waiting carrier hears the difference between the first and later blows and nods as if the bank has delivered an opinion. You do not ask whether it was favorable. The repaired area gradually matches the firmness around it. Its color remains darker, which helps the attendant direct people away until it settles further. You set the beater down and press the patch with your heel. It accepts the weight without sliding toward the channel. For this evening, the sound and the surface agree. Early European writers described Benin's boundaries using familiar words: walls, palisades, ditches, gates, and fortifications. Those terms preserve observations, but they also carry the observer's architectural expectations. A visitor looking for a city wall might compress a cellular landscape into the nearest category available to him. Olfert Dapper, whose 17th-century account became influential, compiled reports rather than personally surveying every feature. Later authors often repeated his descriptions. Archaeology, landscape study, Edo oral history, and local knowledge must therefore stand beside the texts, not beneath them. The source aside lasts only a moment. You return to the bank and pull a loose clod from the repaired edge. Its underside is too wet, so you break it apart and spread the pieces where air can reach them. The ground refuses to behave like a single word. From the gate, you can see why both wall and ditch entered foreign descriptions. One side rises, the other falls. Yet the lived feature also marks belonging, channels travelers, holds vegetation, manages runoff, and joins a network of enclosures extending beyond the observer's view. You smooth the place where the clod came free. A woman at the gate asks whether the passage is open. The attendant answers yes and points to the firm line. The earthwork becomes a route again before the terminology has finished arguing. You look at what the ground is doing beneath your hands: a cut, a bank, a root, and water seeking the lowest line. These relations require no sensational comparison. The ditch receives runoff from the slope. The bank presents a boundary and a raised surface. The gate interrupts that boundary in a controlled place. The walking line crosses the system without allowing every foot to choose a new opening. When the outlet blocks, water begins to rewrite the arrangement. Your repair restores the preferred sequence. A small stone has rolled into the channel. You lift it and place it on the upper bank, where it cannot become the foundation of another blockage. Beneath it, the water has made a round hollow. You fill the depression with coarse soil and leave the channel's center slightly lower. Archaeology is strongest here when it restrains imagination. Surviving profiles, mapped circuits, gate forms, and excavated structures support the physical relationships. They do not reveal every maintenance decision or every word used by workers. The scene therefore stays with observable consequence. You pour the remaining test water. It follows the cut, passes the root, crosses the filled hollow, and leaves through the cleared outlet. Nothing spills onto the walking line. The bank does not become grander because you understand it. It becomes more exact. Its scale is felt through the distance between your wet hand and the next dry foot. A new shower begins lightly. Drops darken the repaired surface one mark at a time, then join until the patch has changed color. You are not finished with the upper outlet. Rain has chosen the most direct method of checking the schedule. You move the basket beneath the bank's steeper side so it will not fill with water. The second worker gathers the loose tools. You keep the hoe because one small ridge still diverts runoff toward the passage. The first water reaches the channel slowly. It carries dust from the slope and a fresh leaf from above. You cut through the ridge with 2 strokes, shaping a shallow notch toward the cleared line. The leaf arrives, turns at the root, and continues. Rain tests every assumption at once. A surface that seemed firm may slump. A slope that looked gentle may concentrate water. A clear outlet may reveal a hidden high point farther upstream. Maintenance gains its evidence through consequence. The attendant draws waiting people beneath the better shelter of the gate wall and keeps the passage clear. Nobody treats the shower as danger. It is an inconvenience with excellent timing and a strong interest in unfinished work. You press the notch with the hose flat side. Water enters it and leaves the walking edge. The repaired corner remains dark but upright. You stand in the rain long enough to see whether the first line holds. Water reaches the cleared channel, hesitates at one remaining leaf, and stops behind it. The leaf is not large. It has simply arrived at the exact place designed to make size irrelevant. You crouch, lift it with 2 fingers, and hold it up for the second worker. The channel has collected precisely the leaf it was built to avoid. He accepts this as a complete report and drops it into the basket. Released water threads past the root and along the lower line. The flow is shallow, but it no longer spreads toward the gate. Silt begins to move with it, revealing a second tiny ridge. You shave that ridge down while the current shows you where the blade belongs. The joke ends there because the consequence matters more. A blocked drain can soften the bank and alter the passage. One cleared obstruction lets the system perform the work prepared for it. People waiting at the gate begin to cross. Their feet remain on the higher line. The attendant sends them one at a time until the wet patch settles. No one steps into the ditch. No one needs to climb the bank. You place the leaf basket upside down beneath the sheltered side. Rain taps its woven base. In the channel, water continues past the point where it had paused, carrying the last loose grains away from the repaired corner. The packed corner holds while the first steady water moves along the ditch rather than across the walking line. You watch the surface closely. A few grains detach. The main face remains. The success is small and material. Drainage has protected the passage better than a higher boast about defensive scale could do. The repaired patch guides water toward the outlet and feet toward the gate's firm center. Its worth lies in those 2 changed movements. You press the margin once with the beater where a hairline crack appears. The second worker adds a palmful of coarse earth above it. Rain smooths the new surface without carrying it away. Across the passage, the attendant lowers the temporary marker. Traffic resumes its ordinary rhythm. A carrier steps through, then another. Neither pauses at the corner. Their lack of attention is part of the payoff. The ground has stopped demanding a decision. The EA remains a work of organized labor and political landscape at a scale far beyond this patch. Yet every surviving earth form has also endured weather at the scale of drops and use at the scale of feet. You stand under the edge of shelter and let the rain continue its test. The channel darkens, the bank glistens, the gate stays open, and the small repair holds its intended line. You walk the short section once more, checking that ditch, bank, gate, and approach still work together. From the outer side, the channel receives water before it reaches the passage. From the city side, the repaired corner keeps feet on the firm route. At the gate, the attendant can still see arrivals and direct crossing. The sequence matters more than any isolated dimension. A deeper ditch without a managed gate would not explain passage. A higher bank without drainage could shed water destructively. An opening without social control would not perform the same political work. The ear is understood through linked functions and boundaries. You stop at the root bend. Water narrows beneath it, but does not pool. At the filled hollow, the current slows and continues. At the outlet, it leaves cleanly enough to carry fine silt beyond the approach. The second worker follows with the basket, collecting one clod that has rolled from the upper face. He presses it into a separate worn spot and marks the place for tomorrow, rather than beginning another repair in fading light. No inspection can guarantee the next season. It can answer the immediate question. The outlet is open, the corner is packed, the passage remains legible. You return to the gate and stand beside the attendant. From there, the repaired ground appears ordinary. That is the condition you were trying to restore. As evening settles, the gate attendant begins the ordinary sequence of watching and closing. A movable barrier is checked. The clear side of the passage is kept free. People arriving from each direction are recognized, questioned, or waved through according to the knowledge and authority of those present. The precise routine at this composite gate is not recorded, so no ceremony is invented. The supported point is that gates were managed social spaces as well as openings in earthworks. Their meaning came from communities and institutions, not only from profiles in soil. You move the tools off the walking line. The short hoe is cleaned against a tuft of grass. The beater rests across the upturned basket. The second worker checks the repaired patch from above, while you look from below. A final pair of carriers approach, before the light falls further. The attendant holds the outward movement, admits them through the narrow, firm line, then releases the waiting person on the city side. The sequence is quiet and practiced. Beyond the gate, the bank continues into vegetation. Within it, the road leads toward occupied compounds. The earthwork does not separate a living city from an empty outside. It organizes relationships among routes, enclosures, communities, and authority. You nod to the attendant. The repair has given his work a cleaner passage for the night, and his management has protected the repair while it settled. You wash the hoe in moving runoff. Red water leaves the blade in thin clouds, clears, and darkens again when you turn the tool. The wooden beater needs only a wipe. You set the basket upside down so rain cannot collect inside it. Maintenance ends by making the equipment ready for another day. Mud left on the hoe would harden. A basket left upright would hold water and soften its fibers. A tool abandoned beside the gate would become an obstruction in the very passage you have spent the evening clearing. The second worker gathers the removed leaves and silt for disposal away from the outlet. The troublesome leaf is indistinguishable from the rest. Its brief administrative career concluded. You take one last look at the bank face. The repaired section is darker and smoother than the surrounding earth. That difference will fade as it dries and receives dust. The goal is not to preserve the appearance of labor. It is to preserve the root. Rain continues beyond the shelter in a steady, moderate fall. Water follows the channel you opened. The gate remains attended. No catalogue of enormous dimensions is required to make the work matter. You lift the hoe onto your shoulder, carry the beater in one hand, and leave the basket to drain. Behind you, the patch stays where it was pressed, uncelebrated and useful. During the next harder shower, water follows the cleared line. It narrows beneath the root, travels over the repaired hollow, and exits through the outlet. The small patch remains where you pressed it. This is the story's payoff. The Aya is not one masonry wall and not a single dramatic ring. It is a varied system of earthen banks, ditches, gates, and enclosures shaped across long periods, joined to communities and movement. Archaeology and surviving traces ground that account. Edu knowledge and living custodianship keep its meanings from being reduced to foreign description or sensational measurement. At this gate, the larger truth resolves through one repair. The ditch receives the water. The bank holds its edge. The passage remains open. An attendant guides two adults across without asking them to step around a fresh collapse. The repaired surface loses a few grains and keeps its form. That is enough. Maintenance cannot promise permanence. It can alter the next consequence. You stand beneath shelter with the tools clean and watch the current take the route prepared for it. The rain makes no distinction between famous earthworks and ordinary soil. People do. They dig, pack, clear, remember, use, damage, repair and preserve. When the shower softens, the gate looks much as it did before the task. The small difference is underfoot, holding through the water. Warm wax turns between your fingers while an apprentice searches the bench for a narrow tool you can locate without looking. Your hand reaches beneath a folded cloth, closes around the smooth handle, and brings it into view. The tool is easier to find by touch than the apprentice is by name. You are working in a brass casting quarter of Benin City, where specialized skill is carried through families, guild organization, repeated practice, and obligations to the Ober's court. The adult at the center of this story is carefully composite. No surviving record gives us this exact bench or this particular apprentice. The craft process, hereditary guild, court relationship, and living continuity are well supported. The wax model rests on a clay core. Its surface is warm enough to accept detail and soft enough to punish an impatient thumb. You turn it toward the light from the doorway and examine a line that has thickened at one end. The apprentice finally notices the tool in your hand. You say nothing. He reorganizes 3 objects that were not lost and returns to the bowl of wax. Outside, the quarter is settling toward evening, but the workshop remains active. Before darkness, the detail must be corrected, the next coating prepared, and every heated place left safe. The goal is not to finish an object in one inspired burst. It is to bring several dependent stages to a sound stopping point. You must complete the wax detail, prepare the form for coating, and leave the work where heat, dust, or a careless elbow will not undo it overnight. Lost wax casting advances through stages that depend upon the ones before them. A weakness hidden early may appear only after metal has been poured and the mold broken. When correction is no longer simple, you draw the narrow tool along the softened line. It lifts a fine curl of wax. The apprentice holds a small tray beneath your hand, having now remembered that catching scraps is easier than searching for them later. The method begins with a core that establishes the inner mass. Wax over that core carries the intended surface, channels are attached. Clay encloses the model. Heat removes the wax, leaving a cavity. Molten metal enters that space. After cooling, the casing is broken away. Each step changes what the next step can safely do. You do not recite the sequence to the apprentice as a lecture. You ask him to turn the form and point to the place where the wax is too thin. He hesitates, then finds it near the lower edge. The workday narrows around that correction. Outside, a doorway closes. Inside, you warm a small piece of wax between your fingers and press it where the model needs substance rather than decoration. The quarter belongs to a hereditary guild whose families live near the work and pass knowledge across generations. Errands is the Edo name associated with the Brass Casters Guild and its historic quarter. The words are glossed here once. Igun identifies the place and guild community, while Errands refers to brass casting. The Met's research on Igun Street describes a living tradition under royal patronage, with guild membership and methods transmitted through families. Edo practitioners have also worked with museums and digital projects to interpret their own history. The craft is not a vanished technique preserved only behind glass. You feel that continuity through routine rather than proclamation. An older tool bears marks from hands before yours. The apprentice knows which clay bowl belongs near the wall even when he confuses the damp mixture. A neighbor passing the doorway asks whether a relative has returned, not whether history is being made. Residence and work overlap. Food is carried through the compound. Fuel is stored with attention to heat. Children know which threshold not to cross during a pour. Adults who do not cast may still support the work through preparation, trade, carrying, or household labor. You turn the model once more. The line now meets cleanly at the edge. Skill has entered the wax through a movement, repeated so often that the hand can judge before the eye confirms. Guild privilege does not mean unrestricted work for an open market. Court guilds in Benin were organized under royal patronage and control, with particular obligations and recognized rights. Brass casting, ivory carving, and other specialized production could be directed toward the palace, its ceremonies, offices, histories, and political relationships. You receive a short instruction from an adult who has come from the quarter's senior household. It concerns the form on the bench and the stage at which it should be presented for review. The exact wording is invented no further. The supported condition is enough. What is made, for whom, and under whose authority are not private choices detached from the court. The apprentice asks whether a decorative line can be extended. You tell him not yet. A pleasing addition may still violate the intended form. Craft knowledge includes knowing when skill must remain within obligation. National Museums Scotland describes court artists as organised into guilds under the oba, with exclusive responsibilities and royal relationships. That structure could confer status and access, while also limiting production. The workshop is therefore neither a factory of anonymous hands nor a modern independent studio. You cover the unused wax and return to the model. The next task is not to express yourself. It is to make the required surface accurately enough that the people responsible for the object can recognize the work they commissioned. You shape the clay core, keeping its mass slightly smaller than the metal form intended to surround it. The core establishes an interior that the finished casting will enclose. Too large, and the metal layer may become dangerously thin. Too small, and unnecessary weight and material change the object. The clay responds slowly under the palm. You add a small amount, press, rotate, and compare the curve to a simple guide kept beside the bench. No surviving guide from this composite workshop is claimed. The action follows the logic of the process. The invisible inside must be made before the visible surface can exist. Lost wax casting in Benin produced extraordinary court works, but the technique is not served by treating every stage as mysterious. Clay, wax, heat, channels, alloy, timing, coordinated labor and judgment do the work. Sacred and royal meanings belong to particular objects and contexts. They should not be spread indiscriminately over every lump of material in the room. The apprentice moistens his fingers and smooths one side. You stop him before water gathers in a hollow. The core needs even drying, not a polished puddle. You set it on a low support where air can reach around it. The object will later be hidden under wax, then enclosed again under clay. For now, its plain surface holds the dimensions upon which every later detail depends. A layer of beeswax goes over the core. You warm each piece just enough to bend, then join the edges with the narrow tool. The wax is not merely decoration. It represents the metal that will eventually occupy its place after the model itself has disappeared. Fine lines can be rolled, cut, pressed, or built onto the surface. Larger forms must keep a consistent relation to the core beneath. Your thumb senses a thin area near the base. You add wax there and feather the join until the repair becomes part of the whole. Museum demonstrations and accounts of Benin casting describe this sequence, while living casters preserve knowledge that no short description can exhaust. The narration gives the basic method and leaves specialist decisions with the practitioners who know them. The apprentice brings a strip that is too cold. It cracks when bent. He looks toward the brazier. You shake your head and show him how to warm it near, not over, the heat. Wax obeys a narrow interval between stiffness and collapse. Outside, the last market calls are fading. Inside, your hands continue in small movements. A line is laid, pressed, checked, and lifted again. The model grows through corrections that will not remain visible as corrections. By the time the surface is ready, the wax should appear to have known its form from the beginning. Heat from your hands softens one edge too quickly. The line rounds under your finger and loses the crisp turn you had just made. You stop. The temptation is to repair it immediately. but warm wax accepts every anxious touch as a new problem. You set the model on its support and move your hands away. The apprentice leans closer. You tell him that waiting is also a tool, though it is the one most likely to be misplaced. Air reaches the softened edge. Its sheen dulls slightly as it firms. You use the pause to clear scraps from the bench and check the clay prepared for coating. The work continues around the model rather than upon it. This small friction reveals the material more honestly than a flawless sequence would. Skilled casting is not a march of perfect gestures. It is attention to changing states. Wax warms, clay dries, fuel burns, metal cools, and each transition opens or closes possibilities. When you test the edge again, it resists the lightest touch. You trim the blurred line with the tool, support the opposite side with 2 fingers, and restore the turn in one pass. The corrected detail is no grand triumph. It is simply ready for the next stage. The apprentice exhales as though he had been holding the model from across the bench. You attach wax channels that will later guide molten metal into the mold and allow displaced air and gases to escape. They look temporary because they are. Their shapes will not belong to the finished surface, yet without them the metal may fail to reach the intended cavity. You warm the end of a wax runner and join it to a thicker part of the model. The apprentice supports the form while you add another channel higher up. Each connection must be strong enough to survive coating and placed so that the pour can proceed. The process makes hidden planning visible. A finished casting may seem complete and self-contained. At this stage, it extends into a small branching system whose purpose is circulation. Material must enter, air must leave, heat must move. The root matters before the object can exist. You ask the apprentice to trace the imagined path with 1 finger without touching. He begins at the pouring cup, follows the main runner, chooses the wrong branch, and finds a dead end. The error is harmless now. You alter the junction. No single surviving object can show every decision because the channels are cut away after casting. Workshop knowledge fills that absence. You rotate the assembly, check its balance, and set it upright. The temporary branches hold, ready to be buried in clay and forgotten. Layers of laterite-rich clay cover the wax assembly. The first coating must reach fine detail without trapping large pockets. You apply it carefully with your fingers and a small tool, pressing the mixture into recesses while preserving the wax beneath. Archaeological work in Benin City has recovered evidence of metallurgy, including at the palace site, and museum accounts describe clay investment around wax models. The local composition and exact preparation could vary, so the narration avoids a universal recipe. Clay from the wrong place, too wet or too coarse, may behave differently under heat. The apprentice turns the form slowly. You work from the lower details upward. The once visible wax begins to disappear under an earthen skin. A second, coarser layer will strengthen the first after it has settled. Later layers will build a shell capable of receiving heat and metal. The change in appearance is quiet but decisive. The model that carried every line is being hidden before it can become metal. Trust shifts from sight to memory. You must know what lies beneath and where the channels run. At the base, you leave the pouring entrance clear. The apprentice wipes clay from its rim. Together, you set the coated form on a stable surface away from the brazier's direct heat. Darkness approaches outside. Inside, the mold has reached a safe pause, its hidden wax protected by the first completed layer. The apprentice brings damp clay from the wrong bowl. You notice the color and texture before his hands reach the mold. This mixture was prepared for a coarser outer layer, not for the fine surface still being covered. You stop him and return the handful. One careless application might bridge a small recess, trap moisture, or weaken the shell where detail demands close contact. The correction is quiet. There is no need to turn an ordinary workshop mistake into a public trial. He fetches the proper bowl and checks it with you before beginning again. The pause teaches more than a scolding would. Materials that look similar may have different work to do. and their place in the sequence matters. The workshop's discipline grows from consequence. Once the mold is heated, hidden faults become difficult to inspect. Once metal is poured, a weak shell can fail dangerously. Once the casing is broken, the result cannot be put back into the same mold. Care belongs early because later stages remove choices. You smooth the corrected area and inspect the lower edge. The fine coating remains intact. The apprentice takes over a simple section under your eye, pressing clay with slower fingers. Outside, someone calls that the evening meal is ready. You answer that the mold needs one more turn. The work is not rushed, but neither is it allowed to drift. The safe stopping point is now close enough to reach. When the mold is heated, the wax will melt and leave the space it shaped. Some wax may be recovered, some is lost to the process. What matters inside the mold is the hollow cavity remaining between core and investment. You carry a previously prepared mold toward the heating area to show the next stage without forcing the fresh one forward. Its outer clay is dry and firm. The channels emerge as openings where wax will leave and gases can move. Heat must rise gradually enough to protect the shell and thoroughly enough to remove the wax and prepare the mold. The exact firing practice belongs to specialist knowledge beyond this scene. The supported principle is the transformation. A model made visible in wax becomes an absence held by clay. The apprentice watches a thin line of melted wax appear at the outlet. The material that received hours of detail is now leaving. He asks whether that makes the earlier work wasted. You point to the mold. The detail has not vanished without effect. It has transferred its shape to a cavity that cannot be seen. The loss is purposeful. The warming mold gives off a mixed smell of clay, fuel, and wax. You adjust its position with tools rather than bare hands. In the fading workshop light, the object looks least like its intended form at the moment, when that form has become fixed inside it. Copper alloys connect this quarter to materials moving over long distances. Benin's brass casting depended upon metal that arrived through regional and overseas exchange, while the transformation of that material belonged to local expertise, court organization, and Edo artistic choices. Archaeology at Benin City has recovered evidence of metallurgy and trade across long occupation. Historical scholarship links brass supplies to exchange networks, including manillas and other imported forms of copper alloy in later periods. The precise composition and route of metal varied, so no single trade story is imposed upon every casting. You weigh prepared pieces by experience and by the requirements of the poor. The apprentice arranges fuel and clears the path between furnace and mold. Wider exchange has entered the workshop, but it does not determine the final object by itself. Alloy becomes meaningful through design, commission, ritual context, political relationship, and skilled labor. A piece of metal on the tray bears no visible memory of the hands that transported it. Soon it will carry the surface first made in wax. Between those states lies heat and coordinated work. You ask the apprentice to check the ground once more. No vessel, scrap, or loose tool may obstruct the carriers. He finds the narrow tool from the morning beneath the cloth where you first found it. This time he puts it in its proper place without being told. The pour requires coordinated hands, controlled heat, and an agreed moment. No solitary flash of inspiration can lift a crucible safely. Steady the mold, watch the channels, and manage the working area at once. Several adults take their places. One watches the furnace. Two prepare to move the vessel. Another checks the mold support. The apprentice remains beyond the clear line, close enough to observe and far enough not to become a new task. The historical record supports organized, skilled labor among masters, relatives, assistants, and apprentices, though the exact number and roles varied. The scene does not claim a fixed crew. It follows the material demand for cooperation. The metal reaches the state judged ready. A brief exchange confirms that the path is clear. The vessel moves. Every person knows the next action before the movement begins. Molten alloy enters the prepared opening. The runners that looked awkward in wax now perform their hidden purpose. Metal travels through the branching cavities while gases escape. The mold receives weight and heat. No one speaks beyond what coordination requires. The pour ends. The vessel is withdrawn and set in its safe place. The mold remains supported, radiating heat. Success cannot yet be seen. The workshop has reached the part of the process where patience returns, heavier than before. You check each person first, then the working area. Only after safety is clear do you look again at the mold. After cooling, the clay casing must be broken. The mold cannot be opened like a box and used again. Its destruction reveals the singular casting inside, along with the channels and rough surfaces that must later be removed and finished. You work on a cooled mold from an earlier pour. A careful strike cracks the outer investment. Another loosens a section near the base. Clay falls away in pieces, exposing dark metal beneath. Every casting carries the possibility of faults. Metal may fail to fill a thin area. Gas may leave a void. The core may shift. A surface may require extensive finishing. The broken mold tells part of that history. But once discarded, it rarely follows the object into a museum catalogue. The apprentice gathers fragments while you free the runners. He wants to brush the surface immediately. You stop him until the remaining clay has been removed from a safer angle. Excitement can be another form of pressure on a fragile edge. At last, the main form is visible. It is not yet the polished object a viewer might recognize. Channels project from it. Clay clings to recesses. The metal's color is uneven. The successful reveal is the beginning of further labor. You turn the casting in both hands. One line made in wax has transferred cleanly. Another place needs patient finishing. The mold is gone, and its one result has entered the next stage. You inspect the revealed surface without pretending that one object explains its original ceremony, owner, or exact room by itself. Court works from Benin can carry histories, authority, ritual roles, ancestral memory, and relationships to the Oba. But meaning depends upon form, placement, use, and Ido knowledge. Museum collections often separate an object from the architecture, people, and sequences that once gave it context. Even a precisely catalogued work may preserve gaps. A plaque, head, figure, vessel, or lamp cannot be treated as an interchangeable illustration of the whole kingdom. You hold the unfinished casting near the doorway light. A shallow floor appears where clay remains. You clean around it, then decide that the edge is sound enough for later finishing. The object will be reviewed by people whose authority and knowledge extend beyond your bench. The cautious reading is not emptiness. It allows the material evidence to remain exact. This casting was made by a demanding process. It required an organized workshop, imported or exchanged metal, local clay, fuel, wax, tools, and learnt coordination. Its final significance cannot be recovered from technique alone. You set it on a padded support. The apprentice writes nothing and invents no label. He simply checks that the projecting channels do not bear the weight. The object's history continues through correct handling before anyone attempts to explain it. In 1897, British forces invaded Benin City, burned parts of the palace and city, killed people, and looted thousands of royal and sacred objects. Many works were dispersed through military possession, sale, and museum collecting. Their removal severed them from settings, owners, and systems of knowledge. The violence must be named plainly because it shaped what survives and where it can now be studied. It is not an adventure climax, and the story does not follow the invading force. The camera remains with Edo work, and with the losses imposed upon it, catalogues, archives, archaeological records, oral histories, and digital Benin now help reconnect objects with places, names, collections, and Edo interpretation. Restitution debates and returns continue in the present, but this episode's task is narrower: to acknowledge that survival in a museum is not a neutral route from workshop to glass case. You lower the unfinished casting back onto its support. The remembered workshop precedes the looting by centuries. and its people do not exist merely to supply objects for later collections. The apprentice brings a cloth for the bench. You take it and wipe away the clay dust nearest the casting. One edge still needs smoothing. The next action is local, careful, and entirely on the side of the makers. The colonial rupture remains true. It does not take possession of the ending. You return to the day's modest task. A rough projection left by a runner must be reduced without striking the finished surface. You secure the casting, choose the proper tool, and work from the heavier metal toward the edge. The apprentice holds the support steady. His attention has improved since the morning search. Each stroke removes a small bright mark. You stop often to feel the transition with a fingertip. The scene after the colonial aside is deliberately ordinary. Edo casting traditions did not end as a consequence of European collecting. Guild families, artists, scholars, palace institutions and communities continue to maintain and interpret living practices. The workshop door opens onto continuity, not disappearance. You do not complete every finishing stage tonight. The goal is to leave the object safe. Once the projection no longer threatens to catch on cloth or another tool, you smooth the immediate edge and brush away filings. The fresh metal catches the low light. No claim is made about the final object's identity or use. It remains an unfinished casting within a controlled workshop sequence. You and the apprentice lift it together and carry it to the resting place prepared earlier. The path is clear because he checked it before the pour. The support receives the weight evenly. One corrected edge has made the night safer for the work. Tomorrow, further judgment can begin from there. Tools return to known places. The narrow wax tool goes beneath the folded cloth, this time intentionally. Clay bowls are covered according to their mixtures. Wax scraps are gathered. Fuel is separated from the cooling area, and charcoal is banked so that no hidden heat reaches the stored materials. The molding area cools gradually. A fresh investment rests where no foot or basket can strike it. The unfinished casting sits on its padded support with the trimmed edge turned away from the passage. The apprentice walks the room once, finding nothing left in the route. Court obligation, hereditary skill, household life, trade, and material process have shared this long day. None can be reduced to a decorative backdrop for surviving objects. The people of the quarter are makers, relatives, workers, custodians, and participants in a living political culture. You check the brazier with the back of your hand held at a safe distance. Heat remains, but it is contained. A final vessel is moved. The door bar is lifted into position. Outside, the quarter has grown quiet. Another workshop closes farther along the street. Its bar settles after yours. You secure the door for darkness. The tools can be found tomorrow. The mold can continue drying, and the casting can wait without strain. The workday ends not with a revelation, but with every dangerous thing made still enough to leave. You balance a covered basket at the edge of an evening market and choose the broader street for the first part of the return. The market is thinning rather than closing at once. A seller folds cloth. Two adults divide the remaining produce between smaller trays. Someone counts empty vessels by touch. The person you follow is a household organizer with 3 ordinary tasks. Deliver the folded cloth in the basket. Check a courtyard outlet before the next rain. Bring the empty basket home before the compound settles for the night. Benin City's planned form appears here through Errands. A broad street carries you away from the market. Intersecting lanes offer shorter approaches to compounds. Drainage affects where you place your feet and where a household places its doorway. The palace precinct shapes the center without making every journey a court journey. You lift the basket cover, confirm that the cloth remains dry, and replace it. The contents press lightly against your hip. Nothing in the load is dramatic enough to rescue you from remembering the outlet. Evening lowers detail. The market's separate voices merge into one soft field behind you. Ahead, house fronts and compound walls create a steady edge along the road. The market road still carries the warmth of the day, while the lane mouths ahead have begun to cool and darken. You walk toward the first turning, measuring the city by the distance between one completed task and the next. Before the compound quiets, you must deliver the cloth, clear the courtyard outlet, and return with the empty basket. The order matters. Cloth stays dry more easily before the air grows damp. The outlet is easier to inspect while a little light remains. The empty basket can travel last without complaint. Household and market movement connect the city's planned spaces. Goods leave stalls for compounds. People carry food, fibre, vessels, fuel, messages and tools along routes shared with court traffic and guild labour. Streets become urban not because they are broad in description, but because these separate journeys continue through them. You move to the road's firmer centre as a pair of carriers approach. The basket at your hip makes your width easy to misjudge. You turn slightly, they pass, and the cloth remains undisturbed. At the first intersection, the direct lane is darker but shorter. You stay on the broader way for one more block because the delivery doorway is easier to identify from that approach. Planning does not remove choice. It gives choices durable relations. A shallow runnel crosses beneath a doorway ahead. Its edges are dry. You step over, remembering the gate crew's cleared channel and the messenger's muddy sandal. At each doorway, completed work changes the sound around you, from bargaining and carrying to rinsing, folding and storing. The city's systems are returning now as familiar images rather than new questions. An early European description reports exceptionally wide, direct streets in Benin, crossed by smaller ways and lined with houses. The account was published by Olfert Dapper in the 17th century. Dapper was a compiler who assembled travellers' information. He did not personally walk the capital with a measuring line. His description is useful when held beside archaeology and Ido-authored knowledge. It records what informants and visitors conveyed about scale and order. It also records European surprise. The admiration belongs partly to the city and partly to observers whose expectations were being overturned. You use only the practical remainder. The broad way carries several streams of movement without forcing them into one file. A narrower lane turns toward the delivery compound. House fronts maintain a relation to the street, even while most domestic space remains behind them. The basket cover shifts. You tighten its cord at the intersection and look for the repaired threshold described by the cloth seller. It should lie after a smooth wall and before a pair of recessed doors. No traveller's superlative can identify that doorway for you. Local knowledge can. You continue along the reported broad street until the wall changes texture, then slow. The first turn is marked by a worn threshold stone, pale against the red ground and familiar from many earlier journeys. The old description has brought you to the correct scale, and the neighbourhood must do the rest. You turn into the side lane. The broad street remains visible behind you for several steps, carrying people across the opening. Ahead, the lane bends closer to compound walls and reduces the sky to a narrow band. This is as far as the early description needs to travel. A broad route and an intersecting smaller way are supported. The exact width, paving, and uniformity across every century and quarter are not. Archaeology shows long-lived alignments and rebuilding, which means continuity could survive through changed surfaces and structures. You pass a doorway with a polished lower wall that reflects the remaining light. It is not the delivery point. The next entrance has a woven screen drawn aside and a shallow stone at the threshold. That is closer to the description you were given. The basket grows easier to carry as your pace slows. You hear someone sweeping within the compound, drawing debris away from the courtyard centre. The sound tells you that household work continues behind the facade. At the recessed doors, an adult looks out and shakes her head before you ask. Wrong threshold. She points one entrance farther along. The planned route has brought you near, but only local recognition completes the journey. Behind the nearest wall, water touches a vessel rim, and the brief sound confirms that the compound is occupied. You thank her, move to the next doorway, and find the wall mark that the market seller mentioned. House fronts reveal little of the courtyards, galleries, rooms, work areas, storage, and family life extending behind them. From the lane, you see a doorway, a short passage, and a slice of inner wall. Once admitted, the compound opens in another direction. Historical descriptions mention orderly rows of houses, galleries, and numerous rooms. Archaeological work in the old palace landscape has recovered walls, floors, courtyards, gates, and successive construction. These sources support architectural complexity without allowing one ideal plan to be assigned to every household. You enter with the basket held before you. The passage turns, preventing a direct view from the street into the central court. Beyond it, an adult is folding mats while another pours water into a vessel. The delivery recipient comes from a shaded room and checks the cloth at once. You remove the cover and lift the folded bundle. Its outer layer is dry. The recipient presses the weave, asks one question about quantity, and receives the seller's answer through you. The cloth changes hands, the basket becomes lighter, but the household task is not finished. You replace the cover to keep dust from the interior and return through the turning passage. At the street, the compound contracts again to a doorway. The recipient's courtyard holds the soft scrape of a broom, a woven mat, and the last angled brightness from above. The city's ordinary scale lies in that expansion and concealment. Public route outside, layered household space within. A second folded delivery has been set beside the wrong doorway. You recognize the market seller's tying cord on a low package near the entrance you have just left. But the recipient's mark belongs 2 compounds farther along. The error is not dangerous. It is inconvenient in the precise way that makes planned streets depend upon attention. Similar walls, repeated thresholds, and fading light can bring an object close to its destination without completing the task. You compare the doorways. One has a smooth repair below the lintel. Another has a narrow drain leaving at an angle. The correct compound has a paired mark scratched into the side wall where residents can see it from the lane. You lift the package onto the empty basket and carry it the short distance. An adult at the proper threshold recognizes the cord and thanks you. No explanation is needed beyond where it had been found. Local signs and neighborly knowledge have corrected what urban order alone could not. A straight street can make destinations accessible. It cannot make every entrance self-explanatory. You return to the first compound's doorway. The basket is empty again. Behind the wall, the delivered cloth is being unfolded across a mat. The lane has grown darker during the correction. Once the misplaced bundle is corrected, both doorways return to their separate routines without any need for further discussion. You store the angled drain and paired wall mark in memory for the walk back, then turn toward the palace side route leading to your own courtyard. The palace precinct lies near the city's political and ceremonial center, but it is not a single building set apart from ordinary geography. Research into the old palace landscape describes differentiated compounds, courtyards, roads, workshops, walls, gates, and societies attached to particular responsibilities. You pass along its outer edge rather than entering. The wall line is longer here, and movement near the controlled approach is more deliberate. An attendant recognizes someone coming from the market and directs him toward a different gate. 2 carriers wait for a group to emerge. The palace is central without erasing the city around it. Guild quarters serve court obligations while remaining residential communities. Markets provision households and institutions. Roads carry official messages beside private errands. Earthworks and gates define spaces at several scales. Your empty basket makes your purpose uninteresting to the attendants. You keep to the public route and follow the wall until the turning toward home. Archaeological reconstruction based on old excavations, Edo informants, and newer fieldwork helps recover this complex landscape. It also leaves uncertainty. Boundaries moved, structures were rebuilt, and maps made from partial evidence cannot capture every period at once. The wall beside you holds its line into the dusk. At the turning, a gate lamp gives a small pool of light to those managing passage. Near the outer wall, the smell of banked fuel drifts from a service area and fades before the next controlled opening. You remain outside its center and take the quieter road beyond. Archaeology finds successive structures sharing axes in parts of Benin City. At the recent Moar excavation, building sequences from the 14th century onward included substantial 16th and 17th century activity, with walls and later structures preserving long-lived orientations. That continuity does not mean the city remained unchanged. Buildings were repaired, replaced, burned, extended, and reorganized. An axis can endure while every visible surface along it passes through many hands. You experience the point by walking. The lane from the palace edge aligns with a compound opening farther ahead. A drainage line follows one side. The relation persists through walls of different texture and repairs of different color. The saucer side ends there. You shift the basket to your other hip and step around a damp patch where the channel crosses beneath a threshold. A woman coming outward places her foot on the same dry stone you used. Planning at ordinary scale is repeated convenience. An aligned route carries sight and movement. A maintained outlet keeps a doorway usable. A wall rebuilt on a familiar line preserves relations that residents already know. The compound you seek lies beyond one more intersection. You can see no sign upon it yet, but the street direction makes the distance predictable. Long continuity is therefore felt as direction rather than sameness, a remembered relationship surviving beneath several generations of repair. Evening softens the surfaces while the alignment continues to guide you. Floors, walls, gates, ceramics, plant remains, and traces of craft offer ordinary evidence beside the famous court objects. At Benin City's recent excavations, researchers have recovered pottery, worked materials, animal and plant remains, metallurgical evidence, and long sequences of building. Oil palm and cotton appear among the botanical traces. These finds do not become a list in your hands. The empty basket brushes a wall. A cooking smell reaches the lane. Someone carries a small pot across a courtyard entrance. Material evidence survives because ordinary actions leave durable fragments unevenly. The palace bronzes command attention for good reason, but they are not the only evidence for urban life. Broken ceramics can show repeated domestic use. Floors preserve movement and rebuilding. Plant remains point toward food, fiber, fuel, or cultivation without narrating every meal. Gates and drains reveal where bodies and water were expected to pass. You move beyond the archaeological aside at once. The household outlet is now only 2 compounds away. A familiar basket hangs near the correct doorway. You recognize it from the morning market. Inside the entrance, the courtyard floor has been swept toward the drain, but a scatter of leaves remains where the channel narrows. The final task has announced itself before anyone mentions it. You set your basket against the wall and enter. The basket's rim touches your wrist as you bend, bringing the great archive of urban life back to one household core. The city of evidence returns to one blocked place beneath a household hand. Leaves have gathered where the courtyard outlet narrows. The covered basket must wait while you clear them. The obstruction is small enough to ignore until rain turns it into the center of the compound. You kneel beside the channel. Dry leaves lie on top, damp ones beneath, and fine silt has formed a lip against the wall. The pattern recalls the gate outlet, though this drainage serves a household court rather than an earthwork passage. Managed runoff depends upon repeated attention. Museum interpretation identifies drainage as part of Benin City's planned urban fabric. Archaeology shows surfaces and structures shaped through long occupation. Neither source records who lifted these leaves. The composite action stays plausible and ordinary. You gather the dry layer by hand and place it in the empty basket. The damp mat needs a short stick to loosen. Water left from washing is pooled behind it, reflecting the upper wall. An adult from the household brings a small vessel. You ask her to wait until the channel is clear. She sets it down and begins collecting the scattered leaves you missed. The outlet emerges as a shallow cut, turning away from the courtyard wall. You draw the silt back, careful not to deepen one side unnecessarily. The pooled water trembles but remains. One final leaf is wedged beneath the lip. You pull it free. Loose silt darkens your fingertips, and the cleared cut appears gradually as a continuous line rather than a sudden discovery. The trapped water begins to move before the test vessel is needed. You lift the remaining leaves, pour a small amount of water, and watch it take the intended line away from the wall. The current passes the cleared lip, bends through the outlet, and disappears beyond the courtyard edge. The household adult follows it with her eyes, then pours the rest. No water spreads toward the room entrances. The task is complete at the scale that matters. Drainage appears throughout the episode as a city system and as repeated local care. A road channel guides a messenger's feet. An outlet protects a gate approach. A courtyard runnel carries washing water and rain away from occupied walls. Planning establishes relations, but residents keep those relations usable. You rinse the short stick in the last flow and place it beside the leaves. The basket that carried cloth now carries debris. Its return load is less valuable and equally necessary. The courtyard surface begins to dry where the pool had stood. A person moves the waiting vessel back to its place. Another closes an inner door. No new question opens here. The water followed the route prepared for it. You check the lip once with your fingertips, find no hidden ridge, and stand. The household's small repair has joined the gate crew's earlier work in memory. The test water carries 1 grain of soil ahead of it, then disappears cleanly beyond the place where the wall turns. Different spaces, same quiet consequence. Water leaves, the wall remains drier, and feet keep their preferred line. The market, guild quarters, gates, palace and Aya remain present in Edo maps, memory, scholarship, institutions and living practice. Benin City is not lost without trace. It is a modern city, and the monarchy, court traditions, guild histories and community custodianship continue. Digital Benin brings together collection records, Edo narratives, place-based knowledge, and maps connecting dispersed objects to their contexts. Edo scholars and practitioners participate in interpreting the past. Archaeological projects work within a living urban and cultural landscape, not upon an empty site abandoned by its people. You lift the basket of leaves and carry it through the passage. The statement of continuity returns immediately to action. At the compound edge, the debris is placed where it will not block another drain. The basket is shaken clean. Across the lane, a workshop door closes. Farther toward the palace, a gate remains attended. The earthwork does not appear from here, but its repaired channel has already carried the rain. These are not relics arranged for a traveller's wonder. They are parts of histories held by people with names, duties, arguments, knowledge, and present claims. You set the empty basket against your hip. The final walk home follows occupied streets. The city's survival is not proven by pretending nothing changed. Destruction, rebuilding, colonial violence, urban growth, and loss all matter. A neighbor crossing the lane recognizes the emptied basket and nods, reading your completed errand without requiring its explanation. Continuity means that Edo people remain the custodians and authors of their history, not scenery around objects taken elsewhere. With the cloth delivered and the outlet clear, the city resolves into distances between tasks rather than into a traveller's superlative. Market to doorway, doorway to palace edge to courtyard, courtyard to home. Broad streets and intersecting lanes made those journeys legible. Compounds organized life beyond their facades. Drainage shaped the relation between water and walls. Guild quarters joined residents to specialized obligation. Gates managed passage through palace spaces and earthworks. Lamps gave useful light in bounded places after dusk. No single observer owns this picture. Dapper's compiled description preserves one early European account. Archaeology supplies material sequences and surviving forms. Museums hold objects and interpretations, sometimes because colonial looting displaced them. Edo histories, scholarship, mapping, guild practice, and living institutions preserve knowledge that foreign admiration cannot replace. You walk without needing to recite the categories. The basket is empty. Your route is familiar. A child is called from the lane. An adult rinses a vessel near a drain. Someone at a threshold folds the last piece of cloth. The planned city becomes ordinary precisely because it supports ordinary completion. You know how far remains by the turn in the wall and the sound of your own compound. The final answer is not that Benin was astonishing because Europeans said so. The remaining distance is known by two bends, one recessed doorway, and the cooking smell that belongs near home. It is that residents built, maintained, used, and understood a complex capital at the scale of daily life. You return along a quieter lane. The images of the evening appear one after another, without asking to be explained again. A lamp near the palace gives a small glow to a threshold. A polished wall catches what little light reaches it. A gate narrows movement between worked earth. Beyond another wall, a workshop door has been secured, and tools wait in known places. Your empty basket moves lightly against your hip. The lane bends, and the palace glow disappears. A drain carries a thin thread of water from the courtyard behind you. The red earth at the road's edge is dark and soft, but the center remains firm. The episode's questions have been answered. Reported lighting is bounded rather than made universal. The Iya is understood as nested ditches, banks, enclosures, and managed gates. Guild skill belongs to living Edo communities and royal obligations. Urban planning appears through routes, compounds, drainage, markets, and the work required to keep them usable. You do not add another conclusion. The street is already lowering its voice. One doorway remains open ahead, then closes after an adult enters. The lamp, gate, ditch, polished wall, and workshop have become familiar enough to carry the descent. Every image has already earned its place through someone's movement, so the quieter return needs no fresh ornament or mystery. You follow them toward the final compound, where no new errand waits. The empty basket rests against the compound wall. Voices thin beyond the doorway, and the city's ordered spaces continue after your errand's end. The broad street still connects the market to the palace-ward routes. Side lanes still turn toward compounds. Water keeps its low line in cleared channels. The gate attendant remains at his passage. The caster's tools stay covered in the dark workshop. A small lamp marks only the nearest wall. You have delivered cloth, corrected a mistaken threshold, cleared an outlet, and brought the basket home. Nothing is unresolved. The city's scale has settled into the space between these completed actions. Inside the compound, someone moves the basket farther from the doorway so that no foot meets it in the night. The gesture is almost the last movement of the story. Benin City does not disappear when the early visitors leave the page, when an excavation closes, or when a museum label ends. Its history remains with Edo people, and in the ground, institutions, language, craft, monarchy, streets, and living city. The doorway draws inward. The polished wall loses its reflection. Within the compound, a vessel is set down, and a mat is drawn inward, completing the last visible household motions. Beyond it, the gate, ditch, lamp, and workshop remain in their places, quieter now, ready to soften into the final familiar images. The red earth is darker now, holding the last warmth beneath the quiet road. A familiar gate rests beyond the softened edge of the lane. The ditch keeps its low line beside the bank, and the cleared channel carries a thin thread of water. Nothing needs to be measured. The lamp is only a small glow on the nearest wall. Your sandal is inside the threshold. The message has gone where it needed to go, and the road no longer asks for another turn. The gate, the bank, and the ditch remain in their settled places. Water passes the repaired edge and leaves it firm. A basket stands upside down near the wall. The broad street has become a dark open space, with only a few known points of light. Voices are fewer and farther apart. The route through the city is no longer an errand. It is simply red ground, a quiet threshold, and the faint outline of a wall that has been passed before. In the workshop, each tool has returned to the place known by hand. The covered charcoal gives no sharp light. Wax, clay, and the resting mould are still. Beyond the doorway, the lane carries no new instruction. The polished surface near the palace holds a dull reflection, then lets it go. The same small lamp remains bounded by darkness. The city is present in the gate, the wall, the drain, and the quiet work left safely until morning. The emptied basket now leans against the compound wall. Water has cleared the courtyard outlet and now makes almost no sound. Farther away, the repaired bank holds beside the ditch. The gate stands as a familiar opening, neither near nor urgent. The lamp glow touches one patch of ground and one lower wall. Workshop tools are out of sight. The broad street, the side lane, and the threshold settle into the same gentle distance, with nothing left to carry between them. Only the established images remain. Red earth, a quiet ditch, a firm bank, a gate, a polished wall, and the small pool of lamplight. The workshop is closed, the basket is empty. The sandal is safely past the threshold. Fires are banked behind the compounds. Water follows the cleared line. The city grows quieter without disappearing, and the familiar doorway stays where the light can just reach it. Beyond that edge, the final minutes belong only to the low fire and its steady embers.